So I'm going to walk you through what I think is a fairly messy example from the writing program. And you have the advantage of having Nancy in the room with you for the rest of the afternoon. And so what I'm showing you right now is bits and pieces of a course syllabus. And I gave you a little bit more of the course syllabus in your information packet from a WRA 100 level course that was taught this spring. And so prior to Nancy's work with our writing program, so Nancy ran the writing program within my department for a number of years. And the big transformation that Nancy helped us achieve was the development of shared goals and learning outcomes, which was hard. And in fact, it's an ongoing process. So the example I'm going to walk you through really quickly, what I want you to pay attention to is the messiness of the example. So I want you to think, as I walk you quickly through this example, I want you to note not just where you see alignments between our programmatic goals and the institutional goals and course-specific goals and the programmatic goals, but also where you see lack of alignment. Because one of the things that this is a process for us as a department. We teach writing to 7,000 students a year. We have a pretty big impact on the first year experience in particular. We take it seriously. We want to do a really good job. We have also 70 teaching faculty we have a lot of people in and out of those classrooms. And so this process of getting a number of very smart, independent, creative, innovative people to agree on language, agree on goals, agree on outcomes, and work through that is a little bit messy. So I think you're going to see some language that it doesn't align. I'm going to try and point it out to you, and I think you're going to see some misalignments as well as alignments, and I want you to see that. I didn't want to give you a perfect and clean example because this process and the intellectual work that you're engaged in is actually really difficult. So, but what you're seeing here is goals and outcomes for the course, and regardless of the 100 level course, we're now in a position in our department in which we have a shared language about goals and we have a shared language about outcomes, which makes arguing and fighting with each other much more efficient. So I'm going to walk you through the same sort of heuristic. What I've identified as the institutional learning goal is effective communication, which is obvious. So in terms of the institutional learning goals, we work, and in your packet, I've given you the writing program learning goals. And you'll see that we work back and forth between the communication goals and the analytical thinking goals. But that's about it. We tend to focus on what you would think that we would focus on in terms of institutional goals. In terms of the dimensions, the things that I've pulled out of the goal dimensions for you to look at are on the table. What I've given you in the next column is the first year selected language from the first year writing programs, shared goals, and then again bits and pieces from the syllabus that I gave you. And I want you to see a couple of things here. I mean, if you read this very carefully, I actually think it's not obvious that all of this aligns perfectly, because I don't think it does align perfectly. But what I do want to point out to you in terms of alignment is this notion about context and situation. So this is terribly important to the rhetorical theory that supports the way in which we teach writing. The notion that audiences, contexts, and situations demand different kinds of communication practices, skills, and expertise. This is actually very hard and terribly important. You don't write the same way in biology that you do in English. Although, and I will resist this, if you look at the way writing programs have been conducted largely in U.S. higher education for the last 150 years, you would think that the only writing that ever happens in the world happens in the English classroom. We know this isn't true, but this is the shared experience that most universities provide for students. So this is actually terribly important, the notion that context, situation, and audience really are important in terms of how students understand what effective communication is and looks like. But I think you'll see that very important alignment in both of the other columns. The notion of various communities, appropriate rhetorical purposes. We use media, and the institutional goal is media. We've shifted it to mode. That's a misalignment. Media and mode are not the same thing. But we sort of mean them to be the same thing here. So this is another issue that we need to work on. But where we do have alignment across this table at least, is this notion of situation and context is terribly important. So I think if you look at the WRA examples, again, it's like the 16th time I've said it because I'm trying to underline it with a crayon. What I want you to see are where there is alignment and where there is not alignment. And I want you to pay precise attention to language. Because as you do the work that you need to do in this situation, in this session, you need to pay a lot of attention to language, because that's where all the magic happens, or it doesn't. Words have meanings. It's crazy. So I'm going to put this all up here because I'm going to walk you through this quickly one more time. So we've added, in this example, we've added the performance layer and the assessment layer. So again, we've pulled the goal dimension out. I've pulled from the tools that you have a performance level, the proficiency in terms of communication strategies for media and various roles and contexts. Again, media and mode, various roles and context. Roles and context is meant to communicate audience, situation, context. You can see the course goal, again, from that syllabus. Explore the different ways writing styles and frameworks are required in varying rhetorical spaces. Again, for me, rhetorical spaces, I can make that work in terms of context, but rhetorical space and context, not the same thing. So we've got some messiness in our own language. But then, in your packet, I've given you a grading rubric for the third writing project from this course. And so I wanted you to get an example of how we try and operationalize these goals in terms of a grading rubric. So I've pulled this element from the grading rubric for this particular 135 class. So you can get a sense of where the alignment works in terms of a goal dimension, a performance level, a course goal, and the way in which that appears in the tools that are used to assess student performance. This is the hardest problem we have to work on. Not only do we have lots of people teaching writing on this campus, they're trained in various ways. And so we have a tremendous teacher development and training problem that we have to solve every single year. And one of the hardest, I work a lot with graduate students. I mentor new graduate student teachers. And one of the hardest things to get them to see is that the way in which they talk about the course in the syllabus is not the same way that they talk about the course day to day. And they ought to be the same. And strikingly, the way in which they're assessing student performance in that class may not have anything to do with the syllabus that they've put in front of people. This is very bad, right? That's massive misalignment, and it leads to confusion and frustration on the part of students. It leads students to think things that smart students think, such as, "Dear professor, what do you want?" Right? "What do I need to do to get an A?" Right? So when students are playing this very sophisticated game of trying to please you as a professor, what they're trying to do, they're engaged in a form of audience analysis that they've learned over many years of schooling, and if they're good students, they've learned to use it effectively. And they're trying to get inside your head. They're trying to figure out this from the mess that you've given them, right? And so one of the things that we're trying to do very hard, particularly with our more novice teachers, although people like me need to learn it and relearn it all the time, is to make these kinds of alignments between goals and outcomes and this very precise and specific tools that we use for assessing student performance. There should be a bright and clear line between those things for you, and you should be able to demonstrate and show that bright and clear line for students as well. Does this make some sense? Does this example make some sense? It's a little messy, and I hope you see the messiness. It's not a perfect example. But it's one that was alive for the last 15 weeks in our writing program this past semester.